Well, good morning, everyone. Happy Monday morning to you, and welcome back to Morning Musings. My name is Don K. Preston. I'm the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma, and I do appreciate so very much you joining me here this Monday morning. And as I have mentioned to you, we're coming to a close of our study of the Olivet Discourse. But what I've been doing over the last couple of months now is connecting dots between some of the very key, critical, foundational passages that relate to eschatology, the time of the end. And I have been showing that some of these texts have powerful, undeniable time references in them that delimit the time of fulfillment to the first century. To me, this connecting the dots hermeneutic is so effective in combining the unity or establishing the unity of the biblical narrative. You know, I want to say something here. I hope none of my dispensational viewers will take offense of this. I hope that you'll look closer at the evidence. I mean, no disrespect whatsoever by what I'm about to say. But the biblical story really is a united narrative. It's not disjointed, it's not disjunctive. And yet, in my personal opinion, nothing is more convoluted, confused, and confusing than the dispensational paradigm. For instance, in dispensationalism, there are 5 resurrections. 5 different resurrections. Now, where does that doctrine come from? That doctrine comes from the hermeneutic that, as you know by now, if you've been watching my channel for very long, that I call the missing word, different word, hermeneutic. That is to say, they go to a text here that speaks of resurrection, and they go to another text that speaks of resurrection, but it does not mention some of the elements that are mentioned over here. Therefore, they postulate, this must be a different resurrection. And thus, over and over and over, they come up with the doctrine of, guess what? 5 distinct resurrections. You have the resurrection of the church saints, you have the resurrection of the tribulation saints, and on it goes. So then, for instance, they delineate between Matthew chapter 25, 31 and following, and the great white throne judgment of Revelation chapter 20, verses 10 and following. What is that delineation based upon? Now, let me say first of all, I believe I have effectively demonstrated that you cannot break the bond between the connection of these passages. I believe that Scripture affirms very clearly, unequivocally, undeniably, that the judgment of Matthew chapter 25, 31 and following is in fact the judgment of Revelation chapter 20, 10 and following. Now that has profound implications. That effectively destroys one of the key pillars of dispensationalism. So attempts are made to delineate between Matthew 25, 31 and following and Revelation 20. They do this in respect to many different things. Well, Revelation chapter 20, 10 and following, verse 12 especially, doesn't mention the destruction of heaven and earth. Or, it does mention the destruction of heaven and earth. Matthew chapter 25, 31 and following doesn't mention the destruction of heaven and earth. By the way, I don't know if you're aware of this or not, but dispensationalism, in addition to having 5 separate and distinct resurrections, also sees that there are 3 destructions of heaven and earth in the Bible. Number 1, the days of Noah. Number 2, that of 2 Peter chapter 3, which supposedly occurs at the end of the current Christian age, and another one at the end of the millennium. And if you happen to have Thomas Ice and Tim LaHaye's book, Charting the End Times, they state this unequivocally. So they have three separate, distinct destructions of heaven and earth. Now I want to suggest to you, they've actually got more than that, of logical necessity. Now why do I say that? Well, because dispensationalists see the book of Revelation as consecutive. They do not see that there are different visions of the same identical time and events. So they see it consecutively chronological, one event here flowing here, and then the next vision is of different events at different times, not recapitulation. See, this is critical to understand that. Now, if that's true, ladies and gentlemen, in Revelation 6:12-17, we have a destruction of heaven and earth. In Revelation 16, we have a destruction of heaven and earth. Oh, and by the way, in Revelation 8 and 9, in the sounding of the trumpets, what do we have? Well, we have stars falling from heaven. And you know what happens here? Dispensationalists, well, see, this star represents a person. Wait a minute. What happened to the woodenly literalistic hermeneutic? But in Revelation chapter 8 and 9, you've got the destruction of heaven and earth. You got stars falling from heaven. You've got the earth being destroyed. Now, they would mince words and say, well, it doesn't say heaven and earth. You see, more of the missing word, different word hermeneutic. But nonetheless, in Revelation 16, and in Revelation chapter 20, verse 12, and then again in Revelation 21, 1-3, we have destruction of heaven and earth. Now listen to me. If you're going to take the position that Revelation is consecutive chronologically, you therefore have to posit four separate and distinct destructions of heaven and earth. But guess what? They take Revelation 20:12, Revelation 21, 1-3, as the same. In other words, they have a recapitulation. Well, why do we not have a recapitulation in the first part of the chapter, first part of the book? Chapter 6, chapter 16, and even 8 and 9. Okay, with all of that said, attempts are made to delineate between Matthew chapter 25, 31 and following, and Revelation chapter 20. I copied and pasted from the website, from several websites actually. And I pointed this out over a month ago, but it's critical at this juncture to repeat this, okay? I hope you don't mind that. But the attempt to delineate between Matthew 25, Revelation chapter 20 is both based strictly and solely upon a negative fallacy. The negative fallacy is just another way, a fancy way of expressing what I call the different word, missing word hermeneutic. Let me illustrate. From some websites on the interweb, we find the following stated and given as reasons why Matthew 25 and Revelation 20 must be different. First of all, the timing of the sheep and the goat judgment happens in connection with the second coming of Christ, Matthew 25, 31 and following. Jesus comes in glory with his angels, sits on his glorious throne, and all the nations are gathered before him. Now, you have to understand, dispensationalists place Matthew chapter 25, 31 and following at the beginning of the millennium. Okay? You have to understand that. Okay. The nations are gathered before him. The great white throne judgment takes place after the return of Christ and the 1,000-year reign of Christ with the saints. After the 1,000 years are completed, Revelation 20 and verse 7 should be verse 5, the great white throne judgment takes place, Revelation 20:11-15. There is, catch this, there is no mention of the king beginning to reign with his saints, no mention of coming with angels or coming in clouds of glory. So what are they arguing? They are arguing that because Matthew 25:31 and following mentions Christ's coming with the angels in judgment, but Revelation chapter 20 does not mention his coming with his angels. They must be different. Well, here's what they're doing. They claim the great white throne judgment takes place after the return of Christ and after the 1,000-year reign of Christ with the saints. Well, you see what they're doing. Number one, they're relying on their consecutive chronology view of Revelation. In other words, chapter 19, the coming of the Lord takes place. After that is the millennium. After that is the great white throne judgment. You see what they're doing? They are assuming many, many things based upon their hermeneutic of the consecutive chronological view of Revelation, instead of recognizing how Revelation recapitulates over and over and over. But I have to hurry. Next reason that they see a delineation, the purpose of the sheep and goat judgment is to see who will inherit the kingdom, who will not. The great white throne judgment doesn't mention the kingdom or an inheritance, just the wicked dead who will be sent to the lake of fire. Now, wait a minute. I've already shown you how they actually believe that the destruction of heaven and earth of Revelation 20, verse 12, and the destruction of heaven and earth of Revelation chapter 21 is the same. That's recapitulation. Well, then that means that the judgment of Revelation chapter 20 is for the time of the rewarding. It's the rewarding of the wicked, to be sure, but it's also the time of the rewarding of the righteous who enter into the new heaven and new earth, which is just another way of saying the kingdom. Next, the subjects of the sheep and the goat judgment are living believers and non-believers. These are the sheep and the goats. The subjects of the great white throne judgment appear to be the wicked dead. Well, then how do the righteous, if they're not judged, how do the righteous enter into the new heaven and new earth, i.e. the kingdom? Next, the basis of judgment at the sheep and the goat judgment is how the nations treated the brothers of Christ. Matthew chapter 25, verse 40. This is not mentioned at the great white throne judgment. No mention, you see. Missing word, hermeneutic. The subjects of the sheep and the goat judgment appear to be those alive at the time of the second coming of Christ. There is no mention of a resurrection of the unsaved dead. The great white throne judgment mentions nothing but the dead who are raised for this judgment, Revelation 20 and 13. The sea and Hades give up their dead for this judgment. You see what they're doing? Since there's no mention over here of something that's mentioned over here, they can't be the same. The sheep and the goat judgment does not mention a great white throne judgment being present, while the great white throne judgment does. Well, I tell you what, Matthew chapter 25, 31 and following, is presenting and positing for us the fulfillment of Daniel chapter 7. When Daniel saw the Ancient of Days seated on his throne, and thrones were set, and judgment was set, and the little beast, or the little horn, was judged and destroyed. Well, wait a minute. That's Revelation chapter 20. The judgment and thrones. You see, this is a classic example of dispensationalists picking and choosing which verses they want to conflate with other verses. The sheep in the throne judgment does not mention the book of life being present, while the great white throne judgment does. Then upon what basis are those in Matthew chapter 25 judged? And furthermore, got to mention this ever so briefly. The great judgment of Matthew chapter 25 is the judgment of Revelation chapter 20. Why? Well, because it's the time of the fulfillment of Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Sukkot. It's the great gathering. Is Matthew chapter 25 the great gathering of Sukkot? Well, of course it is. Is the judgment of Revelation chapter 20 the time of the great gathering? Of course it is. And you see, the Jewish concept of resurrection, i.e. the harvest, in Matthew chapter 13, has the wicked and the just gathered at the same time. Time of the harvest, that's Sukkot. And finally, okay, the sheep and the goat judgment does not indicate that death and Hades are thrown into the lake of fire, while the great white throne judgment does. Well, once again, ladies and gentlemen, this is nothing but an appeal to missing words, different words. Now, tomorrow, because this is so critically important, tomorrow I'm going to share with you how a consistent application of this hermeneutic would demand that we've got about, 8 or 10 resurrections, 8 or 10 comings of the Lord, 8 or 10 end of the ages, 8 or 10 destructions of heaven and earth. Ladies and gentlemen, I've said this many, many times. Everything that I have been sharing with you, everything that I do share with you here on Morning Musings, what I share with you on Tuesday nights with Two Guys in a Bible with Daniel Rogers, what Michael Sullivan and I share with you in our preterist apologetics, what I share with you on my Now TV television show. Every single thing, every point that I try to make is based upon solid hermeneutic and proper exegesis drawn from and utilizing proper hermeneutic. Tomorrow I'm going to show you how if we take this hermeneutic, this verse doesn't mention what this verse does, therefore they're different. It imposes upon the New Testament writers an absolutely unrealistic journalistic rule that nobody would ever impose on any other work of literature. You don't want to fail to be here. So I'll see you on the flip side.